Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Farah from USGBC-LA. Thank you again for joining us this morning. We're excited to have Alex back to do part 2 of this webinar. If you were not here for the first part of it, though, it's absolutely fine. The content she's going to do like a brief overview of everything beforehand and go through what we're covering today. And if you would like to, the webinar is going to be listed in the follow-up email from part 1 of the webinar is going to be listed in the follow-up email for this as well, so you can go through and review it if you would like to. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Alex Major from Brightworks, who has so kindly put together this content and is going to be presenting to us today. We're so appreciative and excited. So I'm going to hand this over to her.
Hi, everyone. Let me just get my screen share started. I think this should work. Let me know if you can see my cover slide there.
Yep, you're good.
Thanks, Alex. So, yeah, thank you for the handoff, Sarah. So, again, welcome. This is part 2. Part 1 was completed about a month ago, and I will be going over a few pieces from that. But before we dive into that, I wanted to introduce Brightworks and myself, for those who may not be familiar. So Brightworks Sustainability has about 38 staff with backgrounds in engineering, architecture, resource management policy, environmental science, and sustainability. We currently have 5 offices in Portland, Oregon, Berkeley, California, Los Angeles, Nashville, Cleveland, and New York City. And we work globally on projects for tech, higher education, government, developers, private owners, and with manufacturers. Our services really focus in on green building and creating a better built environment for everyone. So we're really passionate about the work that we get to do here. For myself, my focus is on healthy and sustainable materials, specifically lately most in embodied carbon. And so my work really covers LEED version 4 and 4.1 certification support around materials and embodied carbon and whole building LCA, Living Building Challenge, materials pedal, redless vetting, embodied carbon. We do a number of custom healthy and sustainable materials programs for some of our owner clients where we look at how we can create a program where across their building portfolio, we're able to help them optimize their material selections. We provide guidance and strategy direction for manufacturers around healthy and sustainable materials. And then we're doing a lot around embodied carbon and the ever-expanding efforts that are happening in that field around zero carbon certification, new tools that are coming out, advancements in how these processes are done and best practices. So it's a really exciting area to be focusing. So today we're going to have a quick recap of part 1, which really focused in embodied carbon and 3 LEED V4 V4.1 credits. And then I'm going to give an overview around products and human health because the credits that we're talking about today are really focused in how we can improve the health of the environments that people are in and our buildings have through our material selection. The credits that we'll be talking about are the BPDO, Building Product Disclosure Optimization, Material Ingredients Disclosures, and the IEQ Low Emitting Materials credits and how those have changed from previous versions. And then we'll end with a Q&A. And after each section, I'll also have I'll ask Farah if there are any questions that have been written into the chat. So as we're going through, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in, and we'll be taking a moment in between topics to make sure we get those answered. Otherwise, you can hold them until the end as well. And then you'll get a follow-up from USGBC-LA with anything related to LEED CEUs and the recording of this presentation. Okay. So many of you may already be familiar with LEED v4, but in case you're not, version 4 of this certification system is continuing to raise the bar in its standards and requirements and trying to pull green building codes along with it and traditional building codes along with it, so that we ultimately reach a point where code is pushing sustainable building just as much as some certifications are or have been in the past. So LEED version 4 is definitely a step up from LEED version 3, but in order to keep pushing the industry, the newer version is pushing what these requirements can be to make them a little bit more difficult and help the industry continue to evolve. And so in the materials and low-emitting materials realm, on the left you can see the version 3 requirements, and then on the right you'll see the version 4 requirements. And so what these boxes tell you is how credits have changed at a high level. And so one thing we went over last time is around the material sourcing. So these 4 credits from version 3 were all combined into 1 credit around material sourcing. And what we'll be talking about today, these 4 low-emitting materials credits from version 3 have been combined into 1 low-emitting materials credit, and they've added additional requirements around emissions. And then there's 3 additional credits that have been added to the rating system. The one we'll be talking about today is material ingredients. So again, last time we talked about building life cycle impact reduction, environmental product disclosures, and material sourcing. And today we'll be talking about material ingredients and low-emitting materials. And you can see that between the 2 versions, the total points for around materials have stayed the same. It's just been a combination and addition of new credits and requirements that have changed at a high level. Okay, so to recap part 1, these credits really focused around embodied carbon and how we can optimize our buildings to have a reduced embodied carbon footprint. And this is really important because according to Architecture 2030, building materials and construction contribute at least 11% of global carbon emissions, and buildings as a whole contribute around 40% of total global carbon emissions, which is just a huge chunk of the pie, and it's honestly probably quite moderate as an estimation, just because there's so many products that have not had their embodied carbon accounted for to date that go into our buildings that we're just starting to really crack into today. So it's really important that we address the embodied carbon going into our buildings, especially as we're continuing to build a lot of buildings worldwide, which is equivalent to roughly one New York City every month or so. And the way that we measure embodied carbon within buildings and products is fairly similar, but there are some slight differences. So in products, we're looking at the full life cycle from raw material extraction to end of life for that product. And then for buildings, we take the information we get from products life cycle assessments and we combine that as well along with the transportation to the project site, the use phase, if there's any replacement of the product that might be needed, and then what we estimate would happen at the end of life for that of that building to all of the products within it. So they are related. And addressing the embodied carbon in buildings is extremely important because for us to do now, because as we move into operations of the building, we have an opportunity to still reduce the operational carbon footprint of a building by installing solar panels or improving the lighting or otherwise looking at ways to improve the HVAC systems and just reduce that operational carbon load to get as close to zero as we can year to year. But when it comes to the materials that have gone to the building, we can consider all of the carbon of the material that is in a building to have been quote unquote spent on first day of business when that material has been installed, purchased, installed, brought to site, and now will have to be used or recycled or thrown away. But we could only add more embodied carbon emissions to the building by adding new materials. It would be very difficult for us to reduce them once those materials are in place. And so there's a lot of tools in the marketplace that you can use to help select better products and do an analysis of the embodied carbon footprint of your building. And the main ones on the product side are the EC3 tool, which helps make EPDs or life cycle assessment information of products more comparable, and it's quite user-friendly and is free to use. There's also the Carbon Smart Materials palette, which focuses on some major materials such as concrete, wood, steel, insulation, and carbon sequestering materials, and talks about how, we can, how those products can be spec'd or optimized in the design of buildings to reduce their embodied carbon footprint. And then, of course, there are EPDs, which are at the product level and tell us about the life cycle assessment impacts from of those products in a standardized way. It's been third-party reviewed if it makes it into some of those formats. And then on the whole building LCA side, the only tool that's free to use is Athena, but there's also Tally and One-Click LCA. And these tools are pulling information from EPDs and other life cycle inventory databases to help us do analyses of the total embodied carbon footprints of our buildings and the materials that we're putting into them within the scope of what materials we focus on. So right now for LEED, the whole building LCA focus is on structure, enclosure, foundation, and roof. And it's not so much on the interior products. Embodied carbon is trickling into regulation, especially in California through the Buy Clean California Act, which applies to all projects that receive state funding. And basically, this act sets a maximum life cycle global warming potential for structural steel, rebar, flat glass, and mineral wool board insulation. It's already in effect in that as of the start of last year, projects needed to submit environmental product disclosures, EPDs, for those products, and then now they're required as of this year, and then starting next year, there will be these maximum values that projects will need to purchase materials that fall underneath, that fall below as far as their measured embodied carbon. This is a really exciting push we're starting to see in other cities as well to really drive the building sector to make smarter choices around lower embodied carbon products and really drive innovation on the manufacturing side in reducing the embodied carbon of their products. And so now really focusing in on the Part 1 LEED credits, the MRC building life cycle impact reduction has a number of options, and I've kind of summarized them with some pictures here. And you can learn more about these in depth in the previous Part 1 webinar recording. So if the building is on the National Register of Historic Places, you can earn points in this category. For ID&C, if you reuse interior materials, you can gain points. BD&C, if you use a salvaged building or a blighted building, abandoned or blighted building, you can earn some points. If you reuse furniture on the ID&C side, we look at how you can reuse salvaged materials, whether or not they come from the building. You can earn points on the BD&C side. And then finally, what we were just talking about, doing that whole building life cycle assessment, you can earn points as well. And then within the environmental product declaration credit, this credit is really driving embodied carbon reductions through creating industry demand for these life cycle assessments to be done. So while on the project side, you're being asked to collect 20 product equivalents or product counts of products that have EPDs. And they can be either industry-wide EPDs, like you see the cement grout for tile insulation, or you're supposed to see, no, sorry, the one on the right is an industry-wide EPD example. And then the one on the left here is a product-specific EPD example because it's specifically around Latacrete. And that's really the ask, and we find it to be quite achievable these days. What it's doing on the manufacturing side is really creating a demand within manufacturing businesses that people are asking for these analyses. It's important for us to start working on this and growing the number of life cycle assessments that we've completed for our products. And then as time goes on, for us to look at that data and understand our manufacturing processes and how we can start to reduce that embodied carbon footprint of our products. So really exciting there. And then the final credit from part one, the sourcing of raw materials credit, focuses on salvaged material, recycled content, FSC certified wood products, certified bio-based products, and purchasing products that have a take-back program. In version 4, there was also an option around legal wood, but that's been removed in version 4.1. And that's my quick recap of part one. If there are any questions, I can take them. Otherwise, we'll move on to part 2 credits.
If anybody has any questions, if they just want to type them into the chat box. We don't have any yet. We want to give it a
okay.
second.
Sure.
Whatever you prefer.
Well, let's move on. And if questions do come up, you can enter them into the chat. Okay, so now starting in on the new content, focused in on part 2. So MR material ingredient disclosures, which is a BPDO credit, and the IEQ low emitting materials credits are both focused on improving the health of materials in our buildings. And this is really important because especially when we start to ask the question of who makes sure that products used today are safe for our health. And that's any products, not just products within our own buildings. You might think it's the World Health Organization or the US FDA, or maybe the EPA, or maybe your state and local government. But the truth is that no one is truly making sure that products used today are safe for our health. In this country, there is the burden of proof is on the public that products are unsafe for our health. So while there are 83,000 chemicals registered in the U.S., only 44,000 of those chemicals even have a name or have any potential information that we can call them by. So remaining chemicals do not have any information available publicly about them. And then of those 44,000 chemicals, 650 are monitored by the EPA toxic release inventory and are basically on a list to be tested for health. But these testing processes can take years, and meanwhile they're being used in the public domain. They're tested individually to see what direct health impacts they may have in isolation on their own. They're not necessarily tested for interactions or combinations with other chemicals on this list. And about 200 have been tested for threats to human health and safety. Of that, only 5 have been banned. So this is really shocking, and this is why the building industry and the LEED credit has put a focus on getting more information about the ingredients that are going into our buildings. And this is important because for those chemicals that happen to be toxic for us, there's 3 main ways that they can enter our body, and some chemicals enter the body in different ways. They don't all they can't all be ingested. They can't all be enter our bloodstream through skin contact and inhalation. It's usually one or 2 of these. But of those, we can absorb these toxins very quickly, and the effects that they have, especially in that body burden over time as they add up and up in our bloodstream, is something that we don't necessarily have a lot of information about. But what we are seeing is increased rates of sickness. This is alarming because the Environmental Working Group did a study in 2005 on the body burden of the pollution in newborns, and they found that of all of the newborns that they tested, they found, for these different chemicals, they found a really high number of newborn babies that already had some of these human-made compounds and chemicals in their bloodstream. And the effects of this is really unknown. But there is a lot of research going on. Harvard recently released a cognitive function research around the air quality inside of buildings, and how a better air quality inside buildings affected the cognitive function of the occupants of that building. So from basic activity level to being able to do strategic tasks, to crisis responses, and in all of the sections you can see they had an improved score based on the air quality of the space that they were in, which is pretty impressive. And what we know today is really the tip of the iceberg. There's so much research and advancement happening, and hopefully improvement in regulation as well, that over time we're expecting to know so much more that what we know today looks like kindergarten games. And some of this research is being done by groups such as the Green Science Policy Institute and their work in the 6 classes, where they're really advocating on a policy level and in the building industry that we stop looking at banning just one chemical, because what that leads to is the case often of regrettable substitutions, where a new man-made chemical that's similar to the previous man-made chemical, but seen to be potentially better and safer because it hasn't been fully tested yet, ends up being not better and not safer than that chemical that had been banned, that had been designed to replace. And so by banning entire classes of chemicals and avoiding entire classes of chemicals from our environment, we're able to avoid those what's called regrettable substitutions and improve our overall health of our spaces. And so the 6 classes that they focus on are highly fluorinated chemicals, antimicrobials, flame retardants, bisphenols and phthalates, some solvents, and certain metals. And what's really fantastic about this resource, and I encourage everyone to go and look at it, is that they've created these short 2 to 3 minute videos about each of the 6 classes. They give you some information about what they are, where they're found, what the health concerns are, how we're exposed, and what types of products that these chemicals are frequently found in. So it's just a really fantastic resource. Diving deeper and drilling into the building industry specifically is the Perkins & Will precautionary list, where Perkins & Will has done a number of has compiled a fair amount of research around a number of chemicals, and you can see by this bottom bold what category those chemicals fall into, and talks about where those materials are found and how we can avoid them and what we can request to avoid them. So those are some fantastic resources that are available for teams to use. So with that very quick kind of overview on material health and built environment and why it's something that we should be concerned about, I want to shift into the LEED credits that we're talking about today and how LEED is trying to push teams to help take market action on improving the health of our environment. And so the first one is the Material Ingredient Disclosures credit, which is similar to the EPD credit in that it is asking manufacturers to disclose their ingredients within their products, because a lot of manufacturers may not know all of the ingredients that go into their products, and that may surprise you, but it's absolutely true. And as they start to find out what's in their products, they're able to optimize those materials out of their products. And asking for ingredient disclosures drives that. So according to Building Green, in version 4, option 1 disclosure is an easy target credit to achieve, and we'd agree with that. It requires 20 products from 5 manufacturers. But option 2 was not achievable for most products. And then version 4.1 changed the requirements slightly so that new construction projects still need to gain 20 product counts from 5 manufacturers. And IDC projects, core and shell projects and warehouses only need to identify 10 product counts from 3 manufacturers. And the way that a product is counted, the most common disclosures are Eclair Labels, cradle-to-cradle products, or certified material health certificate products, or an Hpd. Essentially, if that disclosure is third-party verified or 3PV, it's worth 1.5 product counts. And if it's not third-party verified, but still meets the kind of requirements that LEED has set for that certification, it counts as 1 product. And the reason I say meets the requirements set for that certification is because you might find red list compliant Eclair labels that are not inventory to 1,000 parts per million, or 0.01%, and that would make them not meeting the V4.1 or even V4 LEED requirements for this credit. But by focusing in with your design teams on selecting products that have these disclosures, you're not only positioning yourself to earn this credit, but also driving that market action of understanding what's in products and then optimizing those for health. So here's a Eclair label. This is what it looks like. You can find these on the livingfuture.org Eclair website, which is just a database of all products that have a Eclair label. And there's some key differences between these 2 Eclair labels. The one on the left is noted to be Living Building Challenge LBC Red List Free, which is the highest declaration status a Eclair label can be. And what the Eclair program requires is that product manufacturers disclose all of their ingredients within their product down to 100 parts per million. So 0.01%, I'm sorry, 1,000 parts per million is 0.1%. And then list them on this Eclair label. They're also required to have emissions testing, and then they also tell you about any end-of-life options that products may have, and when it expires, which is annually. But often, Eclair labels are re-upped. So if you have a Eclair label on your project that's expiring soon, it's worth asking the manufacturer when they're going to be updating that, and that they will be. And I would say it's important to download your Eclair labels just so that you have the evidence that you purchased the product while the label is still valid for your LEED submittal. And then on the right is the new Eclair label where it's been third-party verified. This is something that's just been released in the last several months. And it's also starting to include some embodied carbon values along with the standard Eclair label contents that you would expect. So one thing to look into deeper, though, is that we're seeing, okay, this Eclair label has this exception about proprietary ingredients that are less than 1%. So 1% isn't allowed for LEED, So what we need to do then is go into the website, find this page, and look at the ingredient list that's listed on the Eclair Label website to see how it's broken out. Sometimes it might be broken out multiple ways, or just the cast number is proprietary, and there might be more specifics. So there might be multiple proprietary ingredients, and they might be varying percentage values that are listed here. And so you need to add up all of the proprietary ingredients on the Eclair label and make sure that it's less than 0.1%. Since this is 0.1%, or this is 1%, this Eclair label would not be valid for LEED. The next program is Cradle to Cradle, and the requirements are that you have a Cradle to Cradle certificate like this, where the product is certified at the bronze level or higher, and every certification must still be valid. So this one is good until October. There's another database for Cradle to Cradle certified products you can send your project teams to find documentation and also to find products to put into a finished schedule to begin with. And then the other option is to submit a Cradle to Cradle material health certificate. So while Cradle to Cradle certification covers more than just material health, it's a certification for products that has a number of categories, similar to how LEED has a number of categories for buildings. They have a certificate that focuses just on the material health scoring. And so as long as this value here is bronze or higher, and this value here is 90% or higher of materials that have been assessed, then this material health certificate would be valid. Something to note, Cradle to Cradle version 3 is valid for the next 3 years, but version 4 is coming out this year, and any older versions of Cradle to Cradle are expired and considered not valid for LEED. And then with health product declarations, there's another database called the Hpd Repository. And in order to download your Hpd now, you'll have to create an account. HPDs are the place to be the most careful about because of the way that they are completed. They're not all, it's not a certification where all of the data that is going into these is reviewed by the program operator. Rather, these can be uploaded just by manufacturers themselves and completed just by manufacturers on their own. So it's important to go to the HPDC website, download their guide to confirm validity of how to confirm validity of an HPD, and make sure you follow that process in reviewing HPDs. But generally, you'd want to make sure that everything is characterized as yes, that the threshold level is either 1,000 parts per million or 100 parts per million, that there's a link here that links back to the Hpd repository, that you've downloaded this from the HPDC website, and it was not from a manufacturer website, and a few other things. So worth getting that guide. And then as far as version goes, version 2.1, 2.11, or 2.2 are valid, and any older versions, including version 2.0, are no longer valid and considered expired. And then you can also get third-party verified HPDs looking for this little check mark, or they'll even say prepare, it'll say third party, it'll say the third party here. So that's a good place to look to get that extra half product point. Definitely worth, though, taking a closer look at all of your HPDs to make sure they're valid. And this is why we recommend having a buffer as well. So the way that we incorporate this credit into our process is by introducing the design team to the credit requirements along with EPD credit and low-emitting materials and design development, and providing them these databases on where they can find products that are compliant, especially as they're building out their finished schedules, their specs, to kind of start the project off on a strong footing. And then we review the 100% DD finished schedule, determine the gap to reach 20 plus a buffer of products. We want to protect the spec by adding in requirements that substitutions for products that have ingredient disclosures based on our finished schedule must also have ingredient disclosures, and require documentation to be provided in our submittals. Train our GC on how to evaluate ingredient disclosures in submittals, how to use the calculator, and ask them to help us find commodity products like paint, drywall, insulation, and others that have ingredient disclosures to help us get to that 20+ buffer. Collect the product documentation through buyout and make sure that we're tracking well. And then submit our documentation with the construction phase. So you can see this project, after our 100% DD materials evaluation, had 6 ingredient disclosures, so they had quite a long way to go. But this is a good way to show the team, okay, this is something that we're not just going to get without making a little bit of effort to focus on these materials. So let's make sure we keep an eye out for them and get our GC to help us, or consider trading out some materials in our finished schedule. In our buyout form, we have combined them rather so well in the materials evaluation review that we do. I like to split it out. The Eclair Label, Hpd, cradle to cradle, or even other, just because some products will have multiples, you can see here, but even if they have both an Hpd and cradle to cradle, it would only count for one product count, not 2. But it's good to have those links there just so you can find them really easily, I find. And then in the bio form, we really only need one. So combining it into one column, having those labels to look for, and then making sure that they're submitting that with their submittal. And then putting that into the LEED calculator where we're stating that the Eclair Label, health product declaration, cradle to cradle, and it will tally the points for us as well. And then there should also be drops down for third-party verified and whatnot. So, yeah. And so then as we said before, the second point is considered not achievable in version 4. And then in version 4.1, the requirements have changed to really be focused on how a product is planning to optimize or is optimizing their ingredients. So the main way that you can achieve this credit is this option is by purchasing products that have the third-party verified disclosures already. And then you can also see if you can start, we haven't seen as many of these action plans for products and these other requirements, but we'll hopefully start to see more and more of these as they go. Would definitely be geared more towards proactive projects and be an enhanced level of effort to achieve. And it's focused by either cost or product counts from 3 manufacturers or more. So any questions before we move on to low-emitting materials?
We do have a few questions. S. Peterson is asking if you can share your insight on the MRC2 Part 2. It seems really unfeasible at this time, and our team is trying to figure out how to recommend this point to our clients, specifically for 4.1.
MRC2?
Yes.
So the
Part 2 of that.
MRC2 is the Hpd credit, correct? That's the credit that this person is referencing?
I hope.
Or are they asking about option 2 of the ingredient disclosure?
Oh, well, in the second question, they're asking, additionally, can you share your rates of success throughout your work in finding products that meet MRC4 option 2 version 4.1?
Yeah, it's a really short list of products. Mainly what you would be doing is going into the Hpd and declared databases and looking for those third-party verified disclosures. And then the cradle-to-cradle products also, I believe, count as being third-party verified disclosures since they're fully reviewed. So that's the main pathway of meeting those. And you can actually go into the show you. You can actually go into the Eclair database, and under the status, you can search for third-party verified Eclair labels. So you can see there's a handful.
Can you share your rates of success throughout your work in finding those products?
I mean, as far as the rate of success goes, I would say it's starting by looking for those products through those databases and using them. And I don't know that we've had a project look into this option, but I feel like this option is sort of just now becoming more viable, and will hopefully in the next year or so as more manufacturers catch up to these new requirements.
I'm not sure if you just answered this, because honestly I don't know that much about this, but how do you verify the Hpd requirements for option 2?
Through the third-party verified section.
Okay. And then the next question is from Kanika, and it is, what are the changes of Hpd version 1/2 to V21/V211, and why are these versions invalid for LEED V4 or V4.1?
The HPDC has determined that the older versions are invalid because of the newer versions. They are basically, with every version of an HPD, they've been improving the way that ingredients are reported, how they're reported, what gets reported, and how things like organic materials like wood are reported within HPDs. So it's really been driven by the HPD working groups and the organization itself on the versioning of HPDs and the validity of them. And then the LEED requirements are just that basically that HPD says they're still valid, and that you follow all of the evaluation metrics in the on HPD website. So let me show you where to find that. So HPDC. When you go into using HPDs and you go to the LEED V4 credit, you can see here they have guides for how to evaluate each version of an HPD. And it's just now that these are no longer, well, version HPD 1.0 has been invalid for a while, and I think it's just now that version 2.0 is becoming invalid. But you'll also need to look at whether the HPD is nested inventory or basic inventory, and the way that that looks like. So like a nested inventory would show here that it's been nested versus basic, and it's the way that the materials are reported, basically of saying like, here's a like component of my product, and here are the ingredients within them that have been reported. And so throughout this, they'll say for option 1 will all be in blue, and then option 2 requirements will be the blue requirements plus the orange requirements throughout these guides. So really useful resources on these websites.
Amazing. Thank you for going into so much detail. S. Peterson replied back saying that the first question was in relation to MRC2. Do you maybe just want me to link you guys in an email together, or do you want me to reshare that?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay.
Let's do that just so we have time to talk about low-emitting materials. I'm going to move on to that now.
Thank you, Alex.
And if there are any other questions, you can feel free to send them to Farah, and she'll send them on to me as well, or connect us by email. Okay, so low-emitting materials in LEED version 4. So the intent of this credit is all about purchasing low-emitting materials so that the indoor air quality of our spaces is improved. What we might be used to in the past is looking for VOC content for wet applied products like paints and coatings and adhesives and sealants, and making sure that the grams per liter value is less than the South Coast Air Quality Management District values that have been set for those different categories. And now on top of that, we're also looking at all of these different finished materials and materials that are going inside our buildings to see that they've also been tested. So that's where the product is made by the manufacturer, and immediately after it's made, the manufacturer will send a sample size to a lab that will then be put into a testing chamber that will then be basically sitting there for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, the lab will test the contents of a number of aldehydes, VOCs, TVOCs, and other chemicals in the air to determine if what the product has emitted falls below the California Department of Public Health standards for emissions testing. And so in version 4, well, both version 4 and 4.1 focus only on interior products, so products that fall within the air barrier of the building. And the categories in version 4 are ceilings, walls, thermal and acoustic insulation as one category, paints and coatings as another, adhesives and sealants, flooring, composite wood, and furniture, only when a project includes furniture within its main scope of work that the LEED project is pursuing. And you can see the thresholds for compliance are 100%, 90, 90, 100, and 90. And then for composite wood, they now need to be compliant with not NAUF, which is no added urea formaldehyde, but NAF, which is no added formaldehyde, or ULEF, which is ultra low emitting formaldehyde, or CARB. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, the EPA has released a requirement called TSCA, TSCA version 6, Title 6, I believe, that all composite wood sold in the U.S. Should be compliant with essentially the standard. So the main purpose of achieving the composite wood category for LEED projects in the U.S. right now would be making sure you get that documentation, that it is compliant with CARB, ULEF, NAF, or the EPA TSCA Title 6, or that it is exempt. But in general, looking at getting 100% of all of the products in ceiling, walls, thermal, acoustic insulation, it's a huge category. And project teams are having a challenge with just how big these categories were. So in version 4.1, these categories have been broken out. So while the amount of categories, compliant categories that you have to achieve in order to earn LEED points hasn't changed significantly, the amount of categories you have the ability to choose from has changed. And I really recommend all project teams swap to version 4.1 of this credit because the categories are so much more thoroughly explained about what is included and what is not included, which I'm sure that guidance could also apply to version 4 if you wanted to stick with that. But also just the breakdown of the categories to be more, breakdown of the walls category to be smaller and split into that wall panels being one category, ceilings being one category, insulation being one category, makes this a lot more achievable. And then additionally, the thresholds of not being just 100%, but to being 75 to 90% by cost or surface area to have the emissions testing completed. You'll notice that for paints and coatings, adhesives and sealants, 100% of products must meet the VOC content requirements of that South Coast Air Quality Management District, grams per liter. This is a much more streamlined version of the version 4 credit, and I would highly recommend that project teams swap to this version. So this is what the standard looks like. But basically what we're looking at is getting these, in order to get the emissions testing completed, the testing facility, the lab will we'll test that air quality to make sure that the chemical content in that air is below the maximum limit set out by the standard. And there's all sorts of different certifications that you might have seen already for products and be familiar with that align with having emissions testing being completed. Many of these have product databases online, like SCS does, UL does, CRI, Green Label Plus does, FloorScore does, NSF does. One that does not is Berkeley Analytical, and you'll need to get the certificate for products that have had emissions testing done just through Berkeley Analytical from the manufacturer. So a few examples of what emissions testing might look like. Here's an example of an SCS FloorScore certificate. You can see the manufacturer was Interface. It's for vinyl titled, but specifically these lines. And you can see digging in here, okay, it meets version 1.2, 2017, and it's valid until January 31st of next year. I will say, going back, what's significant about what used to be significant about version 4, version 4.1 was this testing standard method being version 1.1, 2010 versus this version 1.2, 2017. And I think that some teams might balk at that, but in actuality, version 1.2, 2017 is the current version. All of these testing standards that you see here are testing to version 1.2, 2017, and they require that their products test on a close to annual basis, except for Berkeley Analytical, which just does that compliance testing one-off, and then
Okay. Thank you so much, Alex. This has been super informative. We really, really appreciate everything. We don't have any other questions at this point. I am going to loop you into a conversation with Susie Peterson. Otherwise, if anybody else has any other comments or questions, they want to go ahead and fill that in. I'll wait a minute or two.
Can you hear me on the phone?
I can.
Okay, I'm not sure when I dropped off or how I dropped off, and I apologize.
Okay, I was just going to fill it in with questions in the meantime, but it was just I think it was like shortly after you switched onto the side, the slide was dropped off. If that helps.
It was when?
You shortly switched over onto this new slide that's present right now.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Thank you for that.
No problem. Yeah, so Berkeley, so what I was saying is that each of these programs required that manufacturers retest close to annually, and anytime a significant formulation change happens for the product, except for Berkeley Analytical, which is a one-time testing program where they just demonstrate compliance at that point in time. So there shouldn't really be a concern around the versioning. And LEED before has had a clarification come out that if a project is registered under LEED version 4 and swaps to LEED version 4.1, if you happen to get a certificate that is under version 1.1 2010 and still valid, then that would still be valid for LEED version 4.1 version of this credit. So many versions in that. Okay, so this is an example of a Berkeley Analytical certificate, and you can see the date it was completed. You can see the product name, the manufacturer, and let's see. And then right here, you can see that this one is in fact the version 1.1 2010. So hopefully Berkeley Analytical will be updating their certificate soon. You do have to reach out to Berkeley Analytical to get the certificate from them. So that's just something worth noting. And then, so that's why if you look in the databases and you're not finding emissions testing for your product, it's worth reaching out to the manufacturer and asking for it. And then the UL Spot operates the Green Guard Gold program, where you can make sure you're downloading the Green Guard Gold certification, not the Green Guard. Green Guard Gold has a higher threshold requirement that matches the CDPH requirements. And you can see here, manufacturer, product name, validity period, and here you can see what it's been tested against and what standard it meets for the CDPH. There are equivalents that are worth looking into. The process, I'm just going to run through this since we're close to time, is the same as with the other 2 credits, but really focusing in on, protecting the spec where those, based on where those product categories you're pursuing are, and the threshold by surface area, I would suggest, or cost. You can choose which option is better for your project to meeting those. But if you're pursuing version 4, just make sure you absolutely put in requirements for emissions testing for the categories that you're pursuing. In the hot list, it's important to track to try and find any finishes that are not compliant with emissions testing, and make sure that those get swapped out with another product that is compliant, or that you're already tracking what that does to your kind of threshold allowance for that category. And then in our buyout form, we're requiring, the VOC limit for wet apply products, the emissions testing certificate, as we went over, and then for composite wood, if it's NAUF or ULEF or other. This all goes into the LEED calculator, which the version 4.1 calculator recently came out, and is organized by categories along the bottom. You put in the name and kind of fill this out. Here I'll just say, put in your documentation or link here, or upload it, but in my experience, you will get a comment unless you just upload it. So it's better to just upload your LEED, all of your emissions testing certificates along with the LEED calculator. And that's it. I know we're 1 minute over, but I will take a couple questions for any that may have popped up before we wrap up. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. We ran right to time today, and if you have any questions or you'd like to follow up with me, my contact information is there on the screen, so you're welcome to reach out.
Thank you so much, Alex. We really appreciate it. I'm going to switch over to another slide right now. I don't see any other questions currently. But if anybody has anything in the next few seconds, they want to type it into the box. Otherwise, in the follow-up email, we will have Alex's contact information if you want to reach out to her directly. You'll also have a recording of this webinar and your certificate for the CEUs. If this is the part 2, if you were also here for part 1, you got that original email with the CEU certificate. We'll be sending out something similar to that for this as well. Otherwise, we have a training that is coming up well, there we go. We have a training that's coming up on April 30th. Alex is also going to be there for that. If you guys or if you're based in Los Angeles and you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. It's going to be at the All Steel Showroom in downtown Los Angeles, covering a lot of this information, but with a lot more depth, essentially. Otherwise, we also have our talent portal launch, which is coming up next week. So all of these kinds of trainings and webinars, if you're enjoying this content, please stick with us. You'll find so much more with it. We're excited to be able to be bringing this to you guys. We also have our Municipal Green Building Conference and Expo coming up in May. We're super excited. I don't know if this would be the first time that you'd be joining us for this annual event, but keeps growing. This year we're expecting it to be almost double, actually more than double, than what it was last year. It's going to be a 2-day event at this point. We have Municipal Green on the first day, which will be a lot more like what the traditional MGBCE typically is. But then the second day, we are going to be hosting a community green, which will be open to the public to provide educational services about the green building movement. It should be awesome. We're very excited about it. It's going to be hosted by the Los Angeles Trade Tech in downtown Los Angeles as well. So a nice central location. We hope everybody can make it out for that. With that said, we just want to thank our sponsors, especially Brightworks and Alex, for putting together this content and also presenting it for us. This is awesome. We really appreciate you, Alex, and we are so excited that you guys could join us. And other than that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up since I know we're a little bit over time. So thank you, everyone, and expect a follow-up email.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alex.